to Simpler. We are three pastors, husbands, and fathers on a journey to make life simpler by holding Jesus as the core for every belief and practice. This journey has shaped us to be more like Christ, freed us from the shame of failure, and encouraged us to a deeper love of our Lord and God. We invite you to join us in the discussions that have shaped and continue to shape our lives.
So you had a good weekend.
Had a good weekend, man.
Your wife was able to run with her broken toe.
She was.
Just not far.
She was initially really upset, but she was happy how it all turned out because she really is looking forward to pushing herself to that next step. Mm-hmm. And I think she was, even though she was behind on training, she was still going to push real hard. And then it's like a crappy situation. Like, so what happened was she picked up Riley. As she was picking up Riley dropped her water bottle and it fell on her pinky toe and it broke. So like, not even a cool story.
Yeah.
Just literally like the best or the like very specific way it landed just broke it.
Broke her toe.
And so
that's painful, man.
Yeah,
toe breaks or hurt.
So she established care with a doctor, talked to them about it, and she was like, I can order x-rays if you want, but it's 100% broken. She's like, I can't really do anything. So Hannah was asking, like, do I wrap it? What do I do? And then basically just take care of it. And then if you notice that it's healing a certain way or whatever, or if it's staying bruised, she's like, then come back. But other than that, just do it. And so, yeah, she did 6 miles in an hour and a half.
Wow.
And And it was gorgeous out there in Tyler, Texas. If you're in Tyler, go to the national park or the state park out there. There's a lake you can swim in that's gorgeous. You're in the middle of a forest.
There's gators in there.
Is it really? Yeah. Well, it's funny. You swim with the gators. Saw a bunch of people fishing. It was cool, man. I almost ran into like a billion spiders and
nice.
Big old spiders too. There was one I took a picture of that its web was between two trees that were at least 10 feet apart.
Like an orb weaver?
I don't know what that means.
They're the big, colorful yellow and black and white ones.
Like this spider?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from what I could tell, I didn't get super close because I was like, if this thing snaps, the wind's blowing towards me and it's blowing right at me. And I know I don't want to be that guy running around in the woods screaming. Yeah. So I got somewhat close. It looked brown to me.
Oh, okay.
About this big or so.
Yeah.
So, but I need to pull that picture up and show you. It's super, like the web was huge.
Yeah, they make really big webs.
I mean, shoot, that top right one, it may have been that because that looks more like brown.
And and that one too is more brown, but they make huge webs.
Dude, massive.
And they're really cool spiders.
They're super cool.
It was really neat because like the web itself was probably like 2-3 feet or so, like around, but you could see its connection points to the trees around it. It was dope.
Hey, speaking of that, we haven't done this forever. I found a hack recently.
Hey,
nice.
And it wasn't on purpose. There was a spot over our garage, like the entrance from our garage into our house, that a spider started making a web in a kind of a general area close to the door. Mm-hmm. And I kept thinking like, all right, I'm going to sweep that off later. And I kept forgetting. It was like 2 days. And I came back in the day I was going to sweep it off, and there were a bajillion mosquitoes in its net and flies. I was like, I might just leave a spider web right there.
Yeah.
And I'll sweep it off periodically, but then I'll let them build it back. But dude, like in times when there's a lot of bugs, I'm like, I'm just going to leave a spider web next to my door.
Did I tell you about the spider I made a deal with when I lived over on?
You did.
I love it.
Funny.
It's the same thing, man. Yeah. Just let them do their thing.
Look, man, you can live here peacefully, kill all the mosquitoes for us.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Don't make babies.
Or like geckos. Like I don't ever get rid of geckos if they're
no. We have like 2 or 3 geckos that I'm pretty sure they like live right inside the roof of my back porch because every night, once every 2 months, the light and it's kind of like bent out of shape a little bit.
Like they're pushing.
And so I think and I see them at nighttime when I'm out there and they just walk around the roof and just killing flies and moths and bugs. I'm like, you guys are great. Yeah. And, but then every now and then I'll come out and that light's just tilted. I'm like, you guys are being aggressive getting in there. Just chill for a second, man. Let them go in first.
Funny.
Man. But we're not going to talk about geckos the whole time. Ryan, what are we talking about today, man?
So last week we talked about sharp disagreements between believers, and we kind of got to the place at the end where we were talking about there's a difference between it being kind of a personal thing. Is this something that I feel personally? Is this my preference? Or is this the gospel? Mm-hmm. And I think we were talking about like, we understand that you're going to be divided with people sometimes over preference, but that shouldn't be a sharp disagreement. If we're going to have a sharp disagreement, maybe it should be more, Paul and Barnabas had a sharp disagreement, and it wasn't gospel, it was preference. And so the response to those sharp disagreements are different, is I think where we kind of landed.
Yeah.
So it's not that you can't have a preferential sharp disagreement. It's just that like how you handle that's going to be different.
We had a premise. I forget what it was. We had a premise last time before the but. Do you remember what that premise was?
No, but it was awesome.
I'll have to go back and listen.
Yeah.
But Ryan,
Like for the whole episode of the
Yeah, what was our conclusion? It was good.
I think that was a huge part of the conclusion was
Dang
knowing, and then I think you'd brought up like,
I
well,
should've
let's talk
listened to
about
that.
practically what that looks like.
you know
Like
what?
the
I didn't
conclusion-
like where we landed, and then we were
Oh,
like,
dude, yeah,
shifted.
yeah.
Yeah,
It was a really good, like, it was really transformative. You can tell.
no, it was this. It was preference and gospel.
Yeah,
Like,
which is
Oh,
which
that's
which
right.
was
Yeah.
your point of
Okay,
tension.
okay.
So Paul and Barnabas had a preferential disagreement, which didn't cause
Oh,
them.
that's right.
Didn't cause them to dislike each other.
That's right.
It didn't cause them to
Yeah.
speak wickedly of each other. They spoke highly of each other. It seems that they did work together again in the future.
Yeah, because
But,
you were
like-
saying that like if someone teaches something incorrectly, or like there's people that like I respect and honor, and there's also teachers that I like that shouldn't be teachers. So like, how
Yeah,
do I
yeah.
handle that disagreement?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Um,
that's
So,
right. Preference
Yeah,
and gospel.
yeah.
If it's a sharp disagreement over the gospel, then like start throwing fists.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But Ryan,
But Ryan,
My bad.
don't my opinions matter more than anything else?
Yes.
yours
you go.
yours don't.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's see here, because see, I'm 15 years older than you, so I'm
Yes.
I'm like 40% older than you. So my opinions count 40% more than yours do.
Yes. That's
That's
exactly
actually-
that's how it works.
I feel like that's actually a common perspective.
Oh, I
yeah.
think it is.
It's like that. There's an assumption that age equals you're more wise.
Yeah, so-
and I've always said
I
age
know.
is an opportunity for wisdom,
I
but
love
doesn't
your
imply
saying.
it.
Yeah. Age
Some
is
of
an
the
opportunity.
stupidest people I've ever met were
No,
old.
no, no, no.
Dude,
So
for real.
like
Man.
you went past that too fast. So
Sorry.
say it again.
Age is an opportunity for wisdom, but doesn't imply it.
Right. And so I love it. It's one of my favorite things that you say.
Slow it down for those dumb old people out there.
Well, no, like he just moved on
No,
to
I know.
talking about something else. So like I think that's something that actually merits discussing.
Yeah.
So like just because people would be like, oh, you know so and so, they're 70 years old, and like, okay, so what? I know 70-year-old idiots, you know, and so like
And I also know 70-year-olds who are wise beyond their
Absolutely.
years.
right. And flip it. I know people who are 30 that are so stinking smart and wise and generous and gracious and gospel-minded people, and I know 30-year-olds who are idiots. And
Yep.
so like it can't be an age thing that we look at. Age is an opportunity for wisdom.
Yep.
Yeah.
It doesn't imply it, which I
doesn't-
think that
doesn't
might be
imply.
why people come to preferences is as
Yeah.
like places where they have sharp disagreements.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got to say that differently because of where we landed. I think that sometimes preferences
No, sharp disagreements is fine.
will come into the same like perspective as gospel disagreements sometimes because
Yeah.
people
They
are s-
weight them the same.
yeah they have such ownership over things they have believed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it bears kind of an honest look. It bears the time that it would take to take an honest look at yourself, an introspective look, and go, okay, why do I feel such a division between this person? Is this gospel? And again, if it's gospel, I think we kick them to the curb. We treat them like false teachers, or we treat them like false followers of Christ. If it's preferential, if it's like, hey, you want to honor the Sabbath this way, I don't think, honoring the Sabbath that way matters. Okay, that's preferential. Now, I guess some people would say, oh, that's gospel. So that's kind of what we were getting at, is how do we know if the thing that I'm disagreeing with somebody on is preference or gospel?
Yeah.
And I think that's really where we wanted to take the heart of this conversation, is how do I know? Because there are going to be some people who say, well, you shouldn't touch alcohol. Alcohol is a sin. I grew up around those people. Like, I know those people. I have friends in ministry who are still those people. Which is so funny, and they say, well, Jesus and his disciples only drank grape juice, or it was only 3% alcohol, or 4% alcohol. It was sweet wine. Well, you can go to HEB right now and buy sweet wine that's 4% alcohol. So is that okay?
Yeah.
And then they're going to say, well, no, because it's different than. Well, no, your parameter was it was 3% or 4%.
Yeah.
Like, and they're going to keep backstepping, right? So we disagree on that.
Yeah.
Is that something then that is my preference, or is that something then that's gospel? So how do we begin to weigh that, guys? How do we begin to, for me, it's really simple, because I think it has to do with the key elements of who Christ is and what he accomplished.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to ask too, is are we coming at it from the perspective of we're the person in the conversation who is hung up on alcohol, or are we coming at it from the perspective of we're the person having a conversation with someone who's hung up on alcohol?
No, we're the ones that feel the division. So it doesn't like I feel divided with you because I disagree with you about this.
Yeah.
How do I, as the one who feels the sting of the division, how do I discern whether I'm divided with you over a gospel issue or a preferential
Gotcha.
issue?
Yeah.
So, in to use your example, you would be the one who is. It doesn't matter which side you're on. You're the one that feels the weight of the divide.
Yeah. Well, that's the reason why I ask it that way. Is that like if I'm going into a conversation, and I hope if this derails anything, just
no, you're fine. Go.
If I'm going into the conversation, I'm realizing there's that division there. Then let's say somebody who is actively opposed to alcohol, Christians do not behave this way, is opposed to the Lord, and they're really intense about it. If I'm going into this conversation with somebody I don't know, or I don't really know the conversation, I'm probably just not going to drink around them. Like,
sure.
Okay, cool. I probably won't partake in that. But if it's somebody that I think is worth like.
There's
That's in like a better way of saying that I have the time for a conversation, right? And this is an open grounds for that. Then I'll probably ask why. Like, I think that the goal, at least for myself, and I know this is different and this doesn't necessarily help everybody listening or watching, but I think the goal in those situations is oftentimes to reinforce the reality that we are united as believers, not divided. And so if this is something that's causing division in that moment, I can either be like, you know what, I'm not going to push division further. I'm just not going to drink in front of you.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to say, you know what, my goal is unity in the gospel. Let's have the conversation and let's push past that. And I think maybe that's a huge part of it as we are the people who feel that, just like what you said is what are the pillars of Christianity and the what Christ has accomplished within his body of believers. And so therefore, if this is something that is hindrance to that, and it is something that needs to be combated like more intensely, like, hey, you're like, this is a false gospel. This goes against who Christ is, what Christ accomplished, the promises of God. Then I think that in that moment, and it's just personality, I guess, but you combat that in some way, whatever that looks like, versus an alcohol situation, continue that going on. Okay, I want to uphold the pillars and the truth of Christianity. I don't know why I just stuck with pillars, but we'll keep going with it. Okay, this person's divided with me. I sense division. I sense the tension. How can I partake in this moment to either get towards unity in Christ or represent Jesus in this situation?
So that's great. I think, but Pierce. Okay, so whether you're the one who the person is divided with, or whether you're the divider or the dividee, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you're going, okay, I recognize this person is divided with me. I think it's still incumbent upon you as a follower of Christ to go, wait a minute, is this a personal division or is this a gospel division? Because if we're trying to be more like Christ and this person's coming to me and we're divided, I think it's still incumbent upon me to go, wait a minute, at least let me check myself and see if there's a division here over gospel things.
Can you describe what y'all mean by division real quick? Because I'm wondering if there's a difference between like tension and actual division. So like when Paul and Barnabas have a disagreement, they don't do ministry together.
Right.
It's not like
sharp disagreement.
It wasn't like there was. It's not like they still did ministry together, but there was still tension. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Like,
They were.
So that's why I guess
they went separate ways.
Some clarity on.
But what we'd say about Paul and Barnabas's separate ways was that it didn't keep them. At least we don't know what Barnabas ever said, but it didn't keep Paul from speaking well about Barnabas.
Agreed.
And so I think, just from what Paul said in 2 Corinthians about the false teachers and how he just rips them to pieces, if it was a gospel division that he had with Barnabas, he would have spoken differently about Barnabas.
Yeah. And maybe addition to that is when he says, expel the immoral brother.
Right.
So like there's maybe some things where like if someone's continuing to reject counsel and wisdom.
And he didn't seem to do that because he told people to receive Barnabas well. And
so like it's different scenarios.
Different.
So it seems like maybe what y'all are talking about is like if there's a disagreement over
whatever
practical, theological, that if it's not something that is blatantly the antithesis of the gospel, like that is in opposition to Jesus, that it's not something that should create, and this is what I was asking about.
Gotcha.
Create any kind of like, because y'all are saying division. It sounds like when y'all are saying division, you mean like there's tension in a conversation.
You're right. There was tension between Paul and Barnabas.
Right. But they didn't disassociate from each other in terms of like, this is someone who's in opposition to us.
Right.
Like when Paul says, what's her faces are in opposition to us.
Right. And he says, be wary of them.
Right. That's different than Barnabas. So, so this isn't because I think sometimes people think division means like
animosity.
Yeah. Like there's a break in the relationship completely.
Well, and there was a break in the co-labor of Paul and Barnabas, but there was not a break in Paul's affection for Barnabas, right? So like he wasn't willing to continue to labor with Barnabas, but there doesn't seem to be any break in his affection or his understanding of who Barnabas was in Christ.
Little side note.
Yeah.
That's the answer to the question I asked you guys before the podcast.
Yes. I just said yes.
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 That's the caterpillar in a bug's life. Remember that?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Remember how we did that at the camp?
Oh, I loved one of the best moments of that movie is when he gets his beautiful wings.
Yeah.
Look at my wings.
I look like little ants from up here.
Oh man.
I gotta watch that movie again.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
do you see what
No.
I'm saying? I think that's I know no one knows what I'm talking about, but like
But we do.
there can be a sharp disagreement over something theological
Yep.
or practical.
Yep.
Where you can say it's not beneficial for us to continue to have the same kind of relationship we've had before.
Yeah.
Where we're saying like, I love you and respect you.
I believe you love Jesus.
Believe you love Jesus.
Yeah.
It's probably not just it's not the best thing for us to continue to do ministry together.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's preference. And that's okay.
Yes.
If
If the disagreement is over something that is a biblical,
yeah.
it's a biblical disagreement.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we need to change the word from preference.
Okay.
Then, because I think if there's a biblical disagreement, we would all agree
It's not preference.
that there's a right and a wrong.
Agreed.
And it's possible for two parties to both be wrong, or one be right and one be wrong, but they're not both right.
Correct.
Typically, unless it's just a real.
Sure.
There's a small Venn diagram where there's an overlap. We're like, oh, you have part of it, I have part of it.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think we need to change the word from preference then away from preference to gospel and non-gospel.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that.
Because you can I can strongly disagree with friends of mine who believe that the Lord's Supper imparts a measure of grace that the cross doesn't. And I can disagree with them on that. And it's, to me, we can debate whether or not it's gospel. The friends that I have would not argue that it's any kind of saving grace.
Mm-hmm.
They would argue that it is. And in fact, I don't know, it's just difference, I think, in language and how we talk about it. But we can disagree on what the verbiage of that conversation is. And it's not gospel. And for me, honestly, in those cases, it doesn't even preclude me from working with them. Mm-hmm. There are a few people that I wouldn't work with again, because they hold to, we've called them in the past, Micah, banners. Like they're more interested in their banner, their particular Christian leaning than they are Christ. Yeah. And I'm not interested in having conversations about filters. So if somebody came to me and they're like, hey, we want to do this camp and we want you to come, and the whole thing's going to be about how, this guy from the 1800s is the father of all faith and blah, blah, like, I'd be like, no, I'm not interested in doing that. And it doesn't mean I don't love them. It doesn't mean but I'm probably not working with them, and probably sharply disagreeing with them on their approach.
And maybe here's a positive, I think, of this situation you're talking about is, if your mindset is this isn't a gospel issue,
right?
This is a non-gospel issue, then you're able to say, I don't land where you guys land, but you still can feel affection and love for them. And I think that's where maybe people struggle is like,
they feel like they have to be like ripped apart.
It's one or the other. Yeah. So like, I was chatting with a missionary, and him and his wife are missionaries in Ukraine. One of the things he was saying that's different about Eastern Europe than the U.S. is Eastern Europe is used to the post-Christian Europe culture. They are used to, like in Eastern Europe or in Europe in general, he was saying that like people talk more politically about policy than they do about towing a party line. So like they're more interested in like what the actual policy is than they are about saying, well, here's what all the people in my group lean, right? So he said, but in the US, it's like, if you don't agree with me on this one political viewpoint, it's like the most polarizing thing you can have. And I think that's kind of how we tend to treat Christianity as well. So like, if I disagree with someone theologically, the tendency is to have a break in the relationship completely, rather than to be able to say, we land in different places here.
Yeah.
we're probably not going to be able to do ministry together, but like I still love and cherish you and respect you.
Well, and I think it comes down to trying to remind ourselves who these people are in Christ. Like the way that the words that I use in my own head is like, there's this person that I disagree with, and then I'll ask myself the question, do I believe that they know Jesus? If the answer to that is yes, then I have to regard them the same way Christ regards them. And they're righteous and they're holy and they're loved and they're forgiven. Doesn't mean that I have to go have lunch with them, but I do have to regard them from a biblical perspective rather than a personal one. And so, because I don't think that there's going to be my section of heaven and their section of heaven. Like we're going to be there together in Revelation 5 going, worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Like we're going to be in that company together. We are part of the people from every tribe and every tongue and every language, right? And so you know, you think about the things that Christians get divided over, and within the church, you mentioned this not unfrequently, Micah, or infrequently, but like music is a big dividing force. I think it's really neat how people dress in our church. And there are some who come really casual. There are some who come, they dress up a little bit nicer. We were talking with some people the other night at dinner, and they were saying that we invited some friends and like, how do we need to dress? And they're like, well, you can dress nice, or you can dress in shorts and flip-flops, or, and I love that we've created a culture where that's not a dividing line. You know? I love that we've created a culture where I think we've been able to remove some of the normal dividing lines. You know? We've had people say to us,
thought about that. That's true.
We've had people say to us, like, I've had probably once a month, somebody asked me like, is there a way for me to give to the church? I don't know anything. And I'm like, well, there's a box in the corner over there, or you can give online. But it's not a thing that we talk about. We don't twist anybody's arms. We're not going to do anything in December that says, hey, be sure you fill out your commitment cards for 2025. Like, it's a dividing line that doesn't have to be there. We're just interested in the gospel. So we're trying to, as far as possible with us, to remove as many dividing lines. And maybe this is what Paul means, I think, in Romans when he says, as far as possible with you, be at peace with everyone. So there is peace, but peace doesn't necessarily mean there's not also disagreement.
Sure. Yeah, because like if we had, say, another pastor say that like they're committed to like making sure people give a certain amount of their money, and like that's they feel like that is part of the commitment that member of their church should have, right? We can have a disagreement with them about that, but still love them. We probably are not going to have them as a pastor at our church, because that's going to be a tense situation, because they're so committed to that and we're so not, right?
Well, it's and sometimes it's Paul and Barnabas. You're like, oh, we're not going to. I think we're kind of in a different situation. I think we three are in a situation more similar to Paul and Barnabas. Not many Christians.
You mean between us three?
Well, no, I mean, not many Christians are in a situation where they have to say, I don't want to do ministry with you anymore. You know what I mean?
I gotcha.
Like, and we're
because there's more people. Is that what you mean? Like Paul and Barnabas were kind of like there weren't a whole lot of people at the time doing ministry.
No, but I mean, like. I've said to people before, like, look, I'm not going to come to your church, or I'm not going to preach at your church, or I'm not like, those are opportunities that we actually have faced in 20 plus years of
That's
doing
funny, because usually it's the opposite for me. They're like, you're not coming to preach at my church.
But so there are people that through the years I've been like, I don't really want to work with this person anymore. I don't really, I don't know that I don't really appreciate the way they do ministry. I don't appreciate their emphasis. But then there are a whole bunch of things, like there was a time a few weeks back, gosh, I say a few weeks back, months maybe now, but like we were at somebody's house, and the way that they talked to and corrected their kid when something happened, I was like, oh, I wouldn't do it that way. And I didn't say anything, you know, and I just thought, and as Michelle and I were leaving and we were driving home, I was like, that felt like a lot of law. And I grew up in that. And I know the possibility. I'm not going to say it's going to happen, but I know how that kid's going to grow up thinking about God and those things. And I disagreed with how it was handled, but I can't even tell you who it was, because it's not like I was like, well, put them on the blacklist, you know? But it was just one of those things I disagree with it, but it doesn't change who I believe they are. And I think they're trying to raise their kids to know Jesus. And I think they're, and I keep reminding myself sometimes, like, a lot of people just aren't asking me. Like people just aren't asking me. So I think one of the biggest reasons that Christians, I think we're petty. I think humans are petty. And I think we create division where there doesn't need to be division. And I think we create Like, we want everything to be an issue. We want to look. Did you watch Braveheart?
Yeah.
Like, you can't get.
That might be the dumbest question you've ever asked me.
Well, I mean, yeah, I didn't know about
It was mainly about me.
But you can't get to that closing battle scene where he's giving his speech and he concludes with, "They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom." And you can't get to that point and not just feel a little bit charged up, like ready to go, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't get to that point and be like, "Oh, yeah." And I think that there is inherently in us a desire to draw up battle lines as people. I think we want to take ownership of things.
I heard
and
someone
defend
talking
them.
about this recently. I think that's actually more common with men.
Yeah, I can
think
see
that's,
that.
I think that's just like a tendency of men in general. I think you can see that even with like little boys and little girls.
Sure.
Yeah.
Little boys are going to fight with sticks and
Yeah.
throw rocks at each other, and girls
Yeah.
are going to sit down and play together, right? So I think that's just something ingrained in
We
us.
like to take up battle lines. We like to take up positions on things, and so
You don't even teach it. Like,
No,
you throw
you don't.
boys in a backyard,
Dude.
and they're gonna like.
it's going to be tag or it's going to be like
It doesn't mean they're like mad at each other, but they pick
Yeah,
up
yeah,
sticks
yeah.
and they're like, let's go.
Yeah.
one of the most fun things that I ever did at a camp, and it was a massive camp, and we had like 400 kids, so massive in terms of size of the camp, not the size of the number of people. But we had this huge 200 on 200 capture the flag, and it was scattered across the woods and these acres and stuff. And to sneak, and it was at night, and it was a full moon, and that was your only light, and you're sneaking through the woods at night, and like there's something like cool about that. It's just like, oh heck yeah, man, and you're running and you're screaming and you got the flag and you're trying not to trip over rocks, and it's just like right. So I think two things. I think naturally people draw up battle lines. I don't think that's inherently a bad thing.
No.
I think we like to own positions. I think it's good. We want to take ownership of what we believe. I also think that today there are a lot of people who are just petty imbeciles, who just want to stir the pot, who just want to make things, I don't know.
AKA bots.
Yes. Yeah. If you're on the internet, they're bots. So one of the things that I think we ought to do is, as believers, we ought to ask, why am I even feeling this tension? Why am I even is this even something I should be wasting my time on? Because I think we get upset about things. So what I do, I try to a lot of times when I'm like, ooh, I don't agree with that, or I wouldn't do it that way. I go, does it matter? I just ask myself that question. Does it matter? Is this anything right now that undoes Christ? These are questions I've been asking for a little over a decade now. Does this change anything about who Jesus is? Is it a misrepresentation of Christ? Is there anything in this that isn't, that's immediately or directly contrary to Jesus? And if not, okay, like they're not asking my opinion, so I'm not going to give it.
Yeah.
And I just pull back. Now, if it was a gospel issue, dude,
What if it's not a gospel issue and they do ask your opinion?
then I'm going to say, here's why I disagree with it. Now, when I disagree, this is also relatively new to me, and I mean that by like over the last 8 or 9 years with you guys, but I try to disagree from a gospel perspective instead of a personal perspective. So if I can't, so like if somebody says, hey, well, what do you think about this? And I say, well, I feel like it's inconsistent to berate your kid. Like if you're constantly making fun of your kid and screaming at your kids from the sideline and saying, you should have caught that, you're stupid, blah, blah, blah. That's inconsistent with Christ. To me, that's...
What if they should have caught it? I'm joking.
I know.
I'm messing with you.
I know.
But what if they suck?
But
I'm with you. So you're trying to like when you have the conversation, you try to shape it from the perspective of who we are in Christ and how that should affect the way we treat our kids.
Right.
Yeah.
I got
So
you.
I try to bring it to the gospel. Now, there are things where people go, they ask me questions. There was one last week, I wish I could remember it, where I said, this isn't a gospel issue. And I just said, what do you want to do? So here's an example. Somebody said, hey, I can take this job or I can take this job. And I was like, great, which one do you want? Like, is there one that you like more than the other? Is there one that affords you more time with your family than the other? Is there one that like, and they're like, well, what does God want me to do? And I'm like, this is not a gospel issue.
Yeah.
Like you're not asking me, well, one of the jobs is starring in pornos and one of the jobs is working like that's a gospel issue. And so I think that for me, I try in every conversation that I have to bring it to the gospel if I can. And if I can't, if it's just a wisdom issue, then I think I can talk about, well, hey, look, you're asking my opinion. Here's what I would do with that. And so like, for example, you and I, Micah, have the same philosophy on money and finances, but we invest differently. And so somebody would come to me and go, hey, what should I do? And I said, well, here's what I would do. Here's what Micah does, but you'll have to talk to him about that because I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think many people should follow my pattern
but,
because a lot of it's based on sweat equity and what I'm able to do
absolutely.
in real estate, right?
But the point being, how you are handling your family's money and how I'm handling my family's money are not right or wrong.
Yeah,
correct.
It's a wisdom thing. It's not a gospel thing.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to say, here's a situation like, I don't know. It's kind of a bad example because I don't disagree with how you're doing it. I just do it a different way.
I was going to say, I think the consistent thing is that we both have a kingdom mindset with our money.
Yeah.
You're in the same boat, Pierce. Like all
it's
of us.
gospel.
Yeah. When we talk about, I think it's what you were saying actually a second ago with like the parents braiding their kids. If you set the foundation as the gospel, then you can talk about the wisdom stuff.
Yeah.
Instead of, I think you could actually do that with alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there are some people who don't want to have a conversation because they're bent on it being wrong, like unbiblical. But like, let's just pretend that's not the case. Let's pretend it's like where you were when we were first friends, where you're uncomfortable with alcohol because of the past.
Yeah,
right?
my
Because
dad
of
was
your
an
family past,
alcoholic.
right?
Yeah, there was a stigma that
you
I
never
grew
said
up
you
with.
thought that it was unbiblical to drink alcohol. You were
Never.
just like, man, I'm just uncomfortable, right? So
Absolutely.
that being the situation, if we set the premise of the goal, we want the goal to be the gospel. Now we can have the alcohol conversations on top of that foundation because it's not changing the gospel.
Yes.
The gospel is actually changing how we think about how we deal with alcohol. Like to your point, Pierce, you're going to make a wisdom decision in the people you're around, which the situation you gave earlier is actually what Paul talks about in meat being sacrificed to idols. Someone who's like, this is wrong.
Yeah.
Not realizing it's actually not wrong.
And then for the sake of the weaker brother,
you're going to abstain, for the sake of their conscience, right? So I think there's some wisdom that goes into that. But I think you're right, Ryan. I think you could probably for believers, you could probably turn every conversation into a wisdom conversation if you're willing to agree on the basis being the gospel.
Sure.
Yeah.
And you might not even always agree, right?
Yeah.
So like, there are probably parenting things that we three would disagree on.
Yeah.
Not disagree, but like say like we would handle it differently with our
different
kids, right?
approaches,
Yeah.
This reason I'm saying I don't think it's always a disagreement is because I think that some of that is based on the kid as well.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
So, but we would say the goal's the same, right?
Right.
And we might even, and I think this is where people need to get to, we might even learn from each other,
Right.
and how we handle the situations with our kids. We even ask each other
Right.
that. And so like there's some growth that happens, but it's because the foundation for us is the gospel that allows us to do that. If someone is not willing to make the gospel the foundation, those conversations become difficult. I think that's where you get to a place where it becomes polarizing.
Yeah.
Because then you have to take ownership of what you did as a parent. You have to justify it and defend it.
Well, a decade ago when we were 40 people, for the church, there was a couple in our house that was hosting the small group that I led. They just said, hey, can we host it at our house? We'd love to do that. And we'd like to provide the snacks and you can still eat it, but we'll host it. I said, sure. So we met over there and I forget who it was, but it doesn't matter. But somebody had a birthday, so they brought cupcakes. And then one of the families in the group, their kid grabbed the cupcake and was like walking around with it in the living room, and they had icing all over their face and all over their hands, and they did like a dive into the couch and got icing all over the couch. And then that same kid later had their milk cup and shook it upside down and was making patterns on the carpet with their milk and all this kind of stuff. Well, I got a call from the host family, and they're like, so we don't know how to handle this.
Yeah.
But that's our furniture and our we can't keep doing this if this is going to happen every week. And so I wouldn't say that the parenting style of the other family was sinful or not gospel. I disagreed with it, you know, and you're in somebody else's home. It's like, so they're like, how do we handle it? And they're like, we kind of want to lay down some rules. And I said, yeah, absolutely lay down some rules, but you can't just go to this one family and say, hey, here's some rules for you. And I said, so what you're going to do is when the Dalglishes come over, our boys were pretty little. I said, we'll get there first, because we always did. And I said, and you'll walk us through and show us the rules and like, you'll tell us. And then the next family that comes in, you'll do the same thing. And then, and like say, hey, look, this is what we're trying, because we're trying to, and I said, and you'll just lay down some rules. Well, that was and it didn't change. so eventually the couple who was hosting said, we can't host anymore. It's too stressful. And it was, I think the husband who was like, it's stressing my wife out. Like it's too much. I was like, I get it. And so that was a disagreement in parenting. That's not a gospel issue. Maybe common courtesy or some wisdom issues or some different things.
It's not gospel at all.
But there's nothing about it that's Jesus or cross. And so it was enough of a thing that the couple who was hosting was like, we don't want to host anymore. And I was like, I don't blame you. I get it, you know? And because they were having to fix up something or clean something every time that the small group left. And so that was it. But it didn't change. I would bet that it did not change, because I know the host couple pretty well. Like, I bet it didn't change how they thought about the person spiritually. But maybe personally, like, hey, I don't want these people to be a guest in my home, which is okay. One of the things I was talking about this morning with a friend of mine was, I don't think that most people are able, let me narrow it. I don't think that most people, but I especially think that most, because I'm caring about Christians, I don't think most Christian people are able to distinguish between the emotion of a thing and the spirituality of a thing. And so what happens is, you and I, Micah, have had in 22 years some hard conversations, and all of them have been in the pursuit of God, but there have been times that you have had to get in my face over some things. And for the sake of our listeners, it wasn't anything that most people would call sin. It was trying to think more properly about who God is and who I am in God, and those kinds of things. But there have been moments in my life where I've allowed my past and my identity from my childhood to shape poorly who I am in Christ. And you had enough. And you got in my face, and a couple of years ago, you got in my face for about 3 hours. And I was telling this story the other day, Pierce, because we were in this room, and I was like, can we just record our podcast now? And Micah was like, no, this is more important. And Pierce hadn't said a word for like 45 minutes. And Micah looks at Pierce and goes, don't you think, Pierce, what do you chime in here? And Pierce goes, yeah, this is more important. And that was all that Pierce said.
It was.
And then Micah laid into me for another 2 hours. That didn't cause a rift between us. That didn't cause.
No.
Now, here's the thing. I could go away from that, and I could go home, and I could tell my wife, this is what he said. And my feelings were hurt, and I felt battered, and I felt beaten, and I could portray all those emotions to my wife. And because she loves me, probably if I had portrayed it to her that way, she would have been like, well, he was an ass. I can't believe he did that to you, right?
And that might have been fair.
It would have been fair if we had only considered the emotional side.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's not fair if you consider the spiritual side.
Yeah.
And so what people do is they only consider the emotional side.
Yeah.
And so
when they equate the two.
Yes. And
what Mike was saying earlier.
Interesting.
Yeah, because what you're doing is you're going, I feel really strongly about this. You know, God does too.
Yeah.
And so they take their emotions and they apply them to God. And so what we have to be able to do is, I need to look at my friend Pierce and go, Pierce, I feel really strongly about this, but I agree that what you're doing doesn't undermine the cross.
Yeah.
And I am able to have both of those things in my head at the same time.
Go ahead.
And so I'm able to have a personal response that says, I disagree with you, and I don't know that I can tolerate what you're doing anymore. I don't know that I'll be able to, but I do agree that it doesn't change who Jesus is, and you're not saying something false about Christ.
Yeah.
So it's not a gospel issue. And that is a hard thing to train yourself to do.
Absolutely.
But it's imperative.
Absolutely.
Because I had somebody who came to me months ago, and a sin situation, and I just said, look, like, yeah, this was horrible. This was a horrible thing. This is bad, but here's who God is.
Yeah.
And so I'm not being like, oh yeah, no big deal, dude. You know, I'm like, no, this was, I'm sorry, man. This is hard. And
I'm wondering too, if that's, or actually, let me go back to this, because I won't forget this. Go with what you were saying.
I was going to ask is like, and this may be a totally different topic or a totally different.
Good, because we need another one.
Is that say you're the person in that situation, just like what you said, you've reached that point of growth and learning, and you're the person that's like, okay, let me self-assess, and like, what is this? Is this emotion? What is this? And the other person isn't there maturity wise or development wise. Is that worthy of a conversation of you to have in that moment, or is just a case by case thing where you say, hey, the way you're actually feeling is so emotion driven, it's not gospel driven. Let's have a conversation about the gospel.
I would not have that conversation in that moment.
To keep the metaphor going, just put down the drink or whatever.
No, I wouldn't have I would not have that conversation conversation in that moment because I have found that people who speak and discuss and argue from an emotional perspective seldom are able to reason.
Gotcha.
In that moment.
That's 100% fair.
And just I guess maybe not in that moment. It's a conversation worth having.
Yes.
In general.
Yes, absolutely.
Hey, the other day you're really heated. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. But you have to divorce them from their emotional connection to it. That's true. 'Cause in that moment, it's just because emotion. It doesn't matter. The emotion will not allow them to have any level of reasoning.
I think maybe the answer is maybe if they're willing to. You know what I mean? Like,
I
don't think we have any responsibility to change someone's perspective on that.
No, I agree. But I do think, like, if this is somebody who's a friend of mine, somebody I care about, it's probably a conversation I would like to have at some point.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it's necessary.
I might recant on this in a few episodes, but I'm starting to wonder if that actually shows like what the friendship actually is. So
agreed.
Like, I think that, all right, us three, there's no question, like our friendship is
deep.
strong.
Yeah,
it's deep. So like, that would be the case with us.
Yes.
If there was some kind of weird emotional reaction, it wouldn't even be days, but it would be like very soon.
It wouldn't be days because we each respect the other enough that we will wade through the beating now to get to the end. We just will.
Okay, let's just say let's put a situation in, like, let's say we're coming back from our pastor retreat. We're all ready to be home. Someone says something in the last like 2 minutes of the drive, pisses everybody off, right? Yeah. We would probably talk about it the next day, right? So here's a scenario where it's like, we're not just going to sit. Sure. All right, so, but
you guys all insulted my wife.
We're going to test this out.
That's right. That honestly, my wife or my kids is probably the thing that would make me not be willing to have the conversation right then.
No, understandable. Yeah, understandable. But I'm thinking what I'm trying to say, I think, is that I'm wondering if our viewpoint of friendship might need to change a little bit. So like when I and maybe this is anecdotal, and there have been people through the years who I have called friends who I have recognized I'm not actually able to have this kind of reasonable conversation with you. You are unwilling to have it, which makes me go, I'm not sure we're at least the kind of friends I thought we were.
That, I think, is the important distinction. So Plato wrote a really interesting article on friendship. And he argues that you could ask two people, A and B. You could say, hey, A, are you friends with B? And A goes, oh, yeah, we're great friends. And then B could go, no, man, we hang out sometimes. And they could have different perspectives of the relationship. And so it's where I try to default, because I have people who, for me, I kind of gauge it. Like, I can tell if I'm a friend, if I view someone as a friend. This is me personally, no one else. I can tell if I view someone as a friend if I'm having lunch with them and it doesn't feel like work. So if I'm going, oh, what are they going to want to talk about? Why did they ask me to lunch? Is it if it feels like work, you know? And then I have a few people who are like, man, I wanted to text you the other day. I had a question, but I didn't text you. And I'm like, dude, we're friends. Like, you can text me anytime. You know, like that's the opportunity we have. So I do think it's nuanced. I think there you go, Colin. And it's and
it is nuanced.
It is. He says we say that in every episode, but also apparently Colin and Andrea have a thing to see if they get mentioned in the podcast. It's like it's not a drinking game for them. I don't know what they do. It's like they just keep count or something. So now I've said Colin 3 times and Andrea twice. And so whatever you have to do, you've got to do some push-ups or pull-ups or whatever it is, Andrea. So now I've made it even.
Andrea.
But where I try to default, because there are people that I feel comfortable with. Michelle and I got invited over after church yesterday. We got invited last night to some people's house for dinner. And I started to feel anxious. For one, I'm super tired on Sundays anyway, but I started to feel anxious and I had to process through that. And I was like, it's not because I dislike the people, it's because I don't know them.
Yeah.
And I'm going into an environment
you don't know
that I don't know. And I don't like environments that I don't know. And I don't know what to expect. I don't know what the conversation is going to be like. I don't even know at this point what we're going to talk about. Like, and I'm like, it's okay. Like, for me personally, I have to process through that so that I can put the anxiety aside, because I'm not interested in living in anxiety. And if I'm not careful, the emotion of that will be like, I don't like these people, because it creates that tension in me.
Yeah.
And so where I default, my retreat position for everybody, and I work really hard for this to be true. My retreat position for everybody is, these are people for whom Christ died.
Yeah.
How do I interact with them in a way that upholds the gospel?
Yeah.
And there are people that I won't ever do ministry with again. There was a gentleman years ago who asked me to do a project with him, and then I don't want to out anybody, but he asked me to do a project with him, and then I worked on a project with him for about a year, and he was just untrustworthy in the sense that, like, I called a buddy of his. Eventually, I finally just called a friend of his that was a mutual friend, and I just said, "Look, is this guy going to do what he told me he was going to do a year ago? Like, is he ever going to do it?" And the guy's response was, he always does everything he says he's going to do. Always too late. And so he'll get around to it.
I got you.
But he makes these big promises and these big sweeping gestures, and then he'll eventually do it, but it's way after the point that you needed the help or you needed the thing. And the whole time I was working with him, he was like, okay, this thing's going to happen. And then it wouldn't happen. And I got so weary that I just decided, I told Michelle, I was like, I'll never work with him again. But I don't think he doesn't love Jesus. I think he loves Jesus. I think he loves Jesus, and he loves ministry so much he overpromises, and he just gets excited. But there's another guy that I worked with once on a mission trip who every word that came out of his mouth was a lie. And I would never work with him again because I don't even know if the dude knows Jesus. And to me, those are two way different things.
Yeah.
Like,
So both of them you're not working with again, but for two different reasons.
completely different reasons. And the way that I would speak about the first guy is, I'm just not comfortable with the way he does business. I think he really loves Jesus. The way that I would speak about the second guy is, this guy doesn't love anyone but himself. And I think that he might not know Jesus. Like, so there's a reason, like, it's completely different scenarios, you know?
So really I think what you're after in that thought is that we need to be less polarized than we typically are, right? Like,
less
need
emotional.
Okay, yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Or at least recognize that it's an emotional response and then bring in the gospel response to it.
Yeah.
To temper it.
Yep.
Because you know what? You can be really emotional about a false gospel, and that can be the right emotion.
Yeah.
Like, flip the tables, rip the people's beards out.
Yeah. I got you. Yeah. You're right.
And so allow the emotion to be shaped by the gospel. And if it's a false teacher, like in the 30 years I've been doing ministry, there have been 2 times that I've been in somebody else's church where I wasn't preaching. I was just there for the weekend or whatever. Maybe I'd done the youth retreat, and then there have been 2 times that I almost got out of my seat in the middle of the service and just said, shut up, like twice. Like, I mean, I was like, if he takes this one step further than he's taking it, I'm done with it.
Dude, I would have accepted anything you said when I was preaching.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I think that sometimes that's the right response. I think you call out the false teachers.
That's an interesting example, because I think culturally that's not okay, right?
Yeah.
And let me be clear. I think in a white Christian culture, that's not okay.
Yeah.
I sent you guys a video yesterday.
I loved it.
It was so fun.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, I'm not a huge fan of like preachers talking about politics.
No, it was in terms of a sermon, it wasn't great.
Right,
in terms of his heart for,
I think it didn't seem like this was his sermon. It seemed like he was like, got to a point and he's like, I got to say these things. And anyways, so black church, and as he's saying these things, he's like, I can't stand with the party who's want to do that. Anyways, Can I just say, I want people to start standing up and that's what I was going to say.
The lady that was waving, she was like, "Oh yeah," and I was like, "How fun would that be?"
So that's why I say like a white Christian culture, because I think in a black Christian culture, and maybe even Hispanic Christian culture to some degree. I don't know about. I haven't been around enough Asian Christian culture in the U.S. to know what this is like, but I have a feeling they're probably more like a white Christian culture. It's not okay to like stand up and in our church and say that, but I think in like, it's possible if you're in a black church, I don't know this, that someone could be like, no, that might be the case, right? So, but I think some of that's cultural, where we're not willing to say what needs to be said sometimes because it's not kosher within the cultural framework.
But in your statement, and I think that's the key to this, you said not willing to say what needs to be said.
Yep.
And if it's something that is contrary to the gospel, it needs to be said.
Agreed.
And so we can't be reined in by
here's
culture.
Here's what's funny. I mean, you guys know this about me. I would say it, right?
Yes.
But most people think because I'm willing to say it that I'm just a butthole. Because that's a cultural perspective, is that it doesn't matter what the content is. If you treat someone badly by like calling them out on something, you're an a-hole. Like that's cultural.
Well, think about, So remember that the division between Paul and Barnabas was Paul did not want to take John Mark with him. Barnabas did. Okay. Remember that Paul in Galatians rebukes Peter to his face in front of all the other elders as a lesson to them, but doesn't have anything, like, there doesn't seem to be any fallout from that. It's just like, so he disagrees with how, now the difference is that he doesn't call out Barnabas because Barnabas wasn't a gospel issue. Peter was a gospel issue. Because he's saying like, he literally says that. He goes, you're being inconsistent with the gospel. And so, he quit working with Barnabas over something that was not a gospel issue, doesn't seem to say anything further to Peter about what was a gospel issue.
The assumption then, I think, is that this issue was resolved.
It was resolved.
Right? That Peter probably goes,
crap. Yeah, you're right.
Right? So this isn't, because I have a feeling if Peter was like, screw you, I'm not going to hang out with the Gentiles, I'm only going to hang out with the Jews.
We would have seen more of that in that letter.
He would have heard that. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he also says even Barnabas was led astray.
Why does, legit question, this is diverting a little bit. Why does nobody think Paul's an a-hole? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why is, and I'm saying this selfishly, like why are people like with my personality, like, why do they not equate me and Paul?
Honestly, because people don't know the Bible. I mean, that's
you're talking about like modern day readers.
I've never heard someone go, man, you know what? You and Paul seem like you're a lot alike.
because Paul is fierce. Paul is fierce.
Just what I ask all the time when someone's like, hey, you shouldn't handle it like that. I'm like, you mean like when Paul says to hell with the people who preach the gospel? Or, I mean, I can go on and on about that. Like, it's just interesting. The reason I ask that is because I think, getting to your point about polarizing, I kind of think that we have put a cultural filter on how we interact with each other as believers. So like if this is how we're supposed to act within a culture, we say then that has more weight than how we're supposed to treat each other as believers.
Well, there are people through the years of ministry who have been mad that I didn't handle someone in sin more harshly. And they'll say, why didn't you do this or this? And I'm like, well, because I think that God can restore that. I think that God can make them whole. And like they assume that because I'm treating somebody with grace, that I have ignored the weight of their sin. And I haven't. But if I am considering the weight of someone's sin bigger than the power of the cross, I've misunderstood the cross. And so I am unwilling. I said this to somebody recently. I am unwilling to believe in a Jesus that small. And so it's not that I don't feel the weight of all the crap and all the garbage and all the things that have happened. It's that I believe that Jesus is bigger than that.
So it's not unwilling. You don't.
Well, yeah. But
I know what you're trying to say. I just think that needs to be
stronger.
Well, no. Because if it's you unwilling, that puts you as the standard of what is God and what's not God.
No. Yeah.
The Jesus you believe in is not that small.
He's not that small. What I mean by it is, I'm unwilling to modify, because
what is true.
Yeah. So we know people all the time who modify God to suit their needs. And it's not a real God, it's an idol. I'm unwilling to do that. I'm unwilling to make an idol of Jesus. Is maybe a better way to say that.
The people are changing, like they're putting a filter on
the truth of who Christ is to accommodate their thing. Their needs.
To be able to justify a situation.
And it's to justify their anger. Like one of the earliest things, I was 20 and I don't remember what we had been at. We were at some sort of college retreat. I don't remember what it was. But I came back with the sense after this retreat of the need to forgive my father for everything. And it didn't mean that I admired him as a man. It didn't mean that I respected him. It didn't mean that I trusted him, but I needed to let go of my anger and forgive him. Right.
Yeah.
And that was for you.
Yep. And so I did that. And I remember a conversation a few months after that with my mother when I was home for the summer. And she goes, have you forgotten who he was? Have you forgotten everything he did? And I'm like, no, of course not. And I was like, I just can't let that shape how I think about him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And this was well before I was understanding like gospel type language, and I was just like, I at that point I came to the place where I was like, I believe that my dad needs Jesus. And so that has to be my concern more than that he would apologize to me or be sorry or be contrite in any way. But like, I still don't think my dad was a trustworthy person. I still don't think he was ever apologetic or sorry. Like, it didn't change what I knew to be true about my father. It just was, I'm not going to let what I know to be true about my father trump what I know to be true about God.
Yeah.
And I'm going to approach my dad from the perspective. Also, when he invited Michelle and myself and the boys to come visit him for a weekend, I was like, no, we're not coming, because
that's a wisdom.
That's
decision.
wisdom.
Yeah.
But it didn't. So I think that there's so much to talk about in this that like it's nuanced, Colin.
There you go.
I do think there's a lot of, what you mean by there's a lot to talk about, there's just a lot of wisdom conversations that need to be, but I think we can simplify it by saying,
because we have to, this is called simpler, and I've made it harder. So
by saying that the gospel has to be the foundation by which we make those decisions.
Yeah.
So you said it beautifully earlier.
You almost say that you need to keep Christ as core.
Almost say that.
Yeah.
Almost say that.
All right. What did I say beautifully earlier?
Like when you're talking about the parenting situation, when you're like, I don't know if I would have done it that way. And then you said, I want to shape people's perspective of parenting as an example from the perspective of the gospel. So like as a parent, my goal now is to be a parent who shows my kids Jesus.
Right.
And points them towards Jesus.
Right.
Now, if that's the foundation, I'm able to parent in individual circumstances with wisdom because the foundation is
individual
the gospel.
kids with individual personalities.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's situational too,
Agreed.
right? Like, so like, I think that instead of what we want to do a lot of times, and I think this
one
is
size fits all.
Yeah. We want to create a rule then and I think that's actually sometimes what creates tension that doesn't need to be there.
Agreed.
Well, this guy parents this way.
Right.
I would never do that. And so like, there's a sense of like tension where you're like, I'm never going to have anything to do with him. And you might be missing an opportunity to have some kind of like community conversation with those people where you, as the gospel is set as the foundation, are able to talk about the wisdom of how you deal with those situations. I think people are so quick, to your point, Ryan, to get emotional about those things instead of recognizing like it's just a cupcake with icing, right? Everybody's going to handle that differently. That couple is very gracious.
Yeah.
That I would have been like, dude, get your kids' cupcake icing hands off my couch.
Yeah.
Like
I'd be like, hey, can I bring you a wash rag to wipe down your kid?
Honestly, I probably wouldn't have been that intense. I probably been like, whoa, hey, no icing. Like you can't, if you're going to have that, you got to stay over here. I would have just said it. I'm less gracious than probably other people in that situation.
Okay. Change that. Because I don't think that's less gracious.
That's fair.
Yeah. So because that's how you're going, why do people always think I'm an ass? Well, because of that.
Because I say I'm less gracious.
No, not because you say that, but because people view that as less gracious. And so
if we're going to shape according to the gospel.
If we're going to shape it according to the gospel, sometimes flipping over tables is still in line with grace. Right? Sometimes calling your brother out for sin is grace.
Doesn't have to be.
And so it doesn't have to be likable.
Right. To your point, it's probably because we've put a cultural filter, like what makes sense in our culture, what we're comfortable with.
You would kick all day long against somebody saying that soft means good. Like, just because you're soft doesn't mean you're good. Just because you handle things like, so you can't you can't have the same thing in grace and be well, they're more gracious than me because I would have stopped them from having the cupcake.
You're right.
Because you can stop the cupcake from being on the couch and not be a butthole about it.
Right.
Yeah.
It just is more firm
It's
more forthright.
It's more forthright. I think it's a great way to say it. And they wouldn't have been ungracious to say, hey, look, we don't allow cupcakes on the couch. That's not a lack of grace.
Right.
No,
you're right.
A lack of grace would have been maybe to embarrass or humiliate the people in front of everybody and say, hey, you're stupid parents.
Hey, parent your kid better.
Or being like, hey, bro, what kind of parent lets your kid do? Like,
exactly.
So we had a I try to, when people bring kids to Wednesday night Bible study, I always set up a train track or the race cars and build racetracks for the kids and stuff like that. And I try to let parents know, look, we're fine with your kids being here. Our philosophy from the very beginning, when Micah's boys were little and our 2 boys were little, was we want our kids growing up around people talking about Jesus. So we're fine with it. And sometimes they get a little out of hand. And so I just address the kid really, and I'm like, hey, hold on one second, and I'll help you with that train, but I got to finish this sentence real fast. And there was a kid the other day, we have a metal bucket with all the boys' Hot Wheel cars in it from when they were little, and there's a couple of kids that like to play with them. And this kid dumped it out, and it's a metal bucket, and he dumps it out, and it's making all this noise because he's dumping it like as slowly as possible. And then he sets the bucket to the side. And we're talking, we have 25 people in my living room, and he picks up a car and he holds it above the metal bucket and drops it in, and he goes, bong! And he was like, And so he picks up another one, and I was like, no, buddy, we can't do that right now because I can't hear over you. Like, I can't, that's too loud, I can't. And so he was like, all right. And he picked up another car and dropped it in there. I was like, hey, dude, we can't do that right now. And he did it a third time, and so I took the bucket away. You know? And his parents were like, we're so sorry. I was like, it's okay. Like, it's okay. He's a kid. He's little. Like, it's okay. But if I had looked at them and said, hey, can you, like, that's not lacking grace either.
No.
So
no, you're right.
So this is something that's never dawned on me before. We did an episode a couple of weeks ago on self-deprecation, and I think that might be the same. I think you have to start dealing with that, because when you say I lack grace, when you say that I'm a butthole, what all you got to do to change that is there are people who think that I lack grace, or there are people who perceive that I'm a butthole.
The difference from the self-deprecation is I'm not saying that out of some kind of insecurity and defense. I'm actually attempting to guard the people that I'm engaging with. But I think it's, even though it's not built out of insecurity, it's the same problem.
It is the same problem.
Same problem.
Because what you're doing inadvertently is you're trying to shape what grace looks like in a way that's contrary to Jesus. Because we wouldn't say that God doesn't put his grace on the shelf to be a different part of who he is. So when he brings Babylon against Judah, when he brings Babylon against Judah, and he warns them through Jeremiah, when Babylon comes, go into captivity, and I will discipline you there, and I'll bring you back. But if you stay here, I'm going to kill you. None of that lacks grace. It's the grace of God to preserve them. He doesn't, people.
To your point, like, he doesn't become someone different in the moment.
He doesn't set aside his grace to do that. And so I think grace,
we have put a cultural perspective on what grace looks like, and I have bought into that.
And so it's
wrongly.
Now, can you be a butthole in that moment and lack grace? Absolutely. But just telling somebody, hey, look,
I have believed the lie. Out of an attempt to guard people. But I have believed the lie and perpetuated that. No, you're right. You're right.
Well, you say a lot that, you don't care about people. I also think that's
I don't care what people think about me. I don't care what people think about me.
I'm going to call you on that one.
Okay.
You do say that, but you will say to Pierce and myself, I don't care about people like you guys care about people.
Oh, I gotcha.
So I disagree with that statement too. I think the manifestation of your care for people looks different than our care for people.
You're right. It's the same. I think it's me believing the same lie of the cultural filter. No, you're so right.
So it's because I think you care a great deal about people, because same thing, a decade ago, there was a couple who, and I couldn't see my way out of the emotional side of it, but every week after church, they would pull me aside and tell me what I said wrong. And it wasn't theology. It was, you use this wrong word, you use this wrong verb. It was you, and
they were just mad about the cupcakes.
and it just got to the point where I was so frustrated, and I was just ready to just like knock their teeth out. And you said, well, let me handle it. And we went and had a conversation, and you handled it, and you were so kind, and but you also knew the couple better than I did. And the way you handled it with care. You handled it with, look, if we found out a couple was in our church and the husband was soliciting sex from other women in our church, you wouldn't handle it with kindness, and you would handle it fiercely. And that's also not a lack of grace. Because it's grace for our body. You're protecting the body of Christ.
No, you're right. I think it's there's a lot to, that's a brand new thought, and you're 100% right. And it's like, what it's going to be now is me, I think, like, it won't take me long, but like
tweaking language.
Yeah. Phrasing it different. Because you're right. The danger of me saying those kind of things is that I am portraying an incorrect viewpoint of grace.
Yes. Yeah. And you're basically saying that if somebody says to somebody else, hey, don't let your kid put dirty hands on my couch, that they don't have grace.
Correct.
Which is not the case.
No. I am letting a cultural viewpoint be in front of a gospel viewpoint.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Filters.
Well, I don't think it's not going to be a hard change for me, but I think it's an important one.
Yeah. I think it's an incredibly important change because I don't want to minimize. You stand on your own 2 feet better probably than anybody I've ever known. I've said to both of you guys in the summers when we don't get to meet on a regular basis, I feel the weight of that because especially if I'm studying a lot, I have all these thoughts in my head that I haven't had a chance to like really bear out. And I need this. I need this conversation. I need it.
Yeah.
I don't feel like either of you need it to the degree that I do. Although Pierce, I think you're probably closer to me in that. You stand on your own 2 feet better than anybody I know. That could be the biggest detriment in your marriage, in your raising your kids, in your ministry. It could be the biggest detriment. It can also be an incredible asset, right? If you use it well.
No,
but me saying that you stand on your own 2 feet better than anybody else I know doesn't mean that you don't think wrongly about yourself in some ways, like this one that's almost self-deprecating, but not the same way I'm self-deprecating.
Yeah, it's not built out of insecurity.
No, it's.
I think you're right in that, like, if I perpetuate an idea to, let's just say, for example, my wife and boys, that I'm not gracious, what are they going to believe?
Yeah.
I'm not gracious.
Yeah.
So when they see me interact with somebody, they're using the standard of what I've said.
You've already established that.
That I've established. That's a bad place. I am selling them a lie because that's not gospel.
Yeah.
They would have to then read the New Testament and go, Paul's not gracious.
Right. Right. Jesus isn't gracious. God isn't gracious. Yeah. Which is what a lot of people do, by the way. Yeah. This is why people will say, I don't like the God of the Old Testament. I like the God of the New Testament. The God of the Old Testament doesn't have any grace. And you're like, ooh, no.
Yeah.
Because it's based off of a faulty standard.
Exactly.
Now, the detriment, somebody who doesn't have integrity would say, oh yeah, I'm being gracious when I'm being an asshole. So somebody would use this conversation to endorse them being a butthole.
Yeah.
But again, what we came back to a moment ago is it has to be the gospel.
Right. Yeah.
And so this is me, and I think I've said this to you guys before, but when I'm counseling somebody, I started this about 4 years ago. When I counsel somebody now and I kind of hear their situation, I will do one of two things. I will say, okay, there's a really fat person who goes to the doctor and they're like, I'm not doing well, my blood pressure's high, all this kind of stuff. And the doctor says, hey, I want you to cut out sodas. Try cutting out sodas for the next 6 months and walk to your mailbox twice a day. That's all I want you to do. And then let's see where you are in 6 months. I think that's going to bring some of your levels down, and let's start there and we'll go from there. There's another fat dude that goes into the doctor and the doctor goes, if I don't have you on the table this afternoon, you're going to die.
Yeah.
And I will tell people sometimes, like, look, you're not going to die. We don't have to do surgery. If we can tweak some things, then that's grace. But it's also grace to say, you are in such a crappy situation. If we don't change it today, this is going to blow up your life.
Absolutely.
That's grace.
Yeah.
That's not being a butthole. And so it was also grace.
You're right. I care.
Mark this down.
I care about people.
Oh, I know you do.
Because you guys, what do I do when I don't care about people?
Look,
you stop, cut off.
I ignore them.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's if I'm engaging with somebody.
Pierce and I are evidence that you care about people because we believe you care about us.
Because we suck. Yeah. And you're still around.
But you've seen that, right? Like, if I don't care about somebody,
yeah,
it's like I don't think about them. There's no engagement, right? So, I'd never thought about that before. That like, just because someone thinks I'm being an a-hole when I'm dealing with somebody,
you've bought into what everybody else has said about you, or what you think other people are saying about you.
Even though that is born out of me having a concern for that person and caring about them. Because if not, what I have shown by not even thinking about this is that when I don't care about someone, I just flat out ignore them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and it's pride, it's ego, but it's just a different flavor. Like it's
which part?
Well, just like all of these things, because at the end of the day, what you're thinking is if you're not being self-deprecating, you're putting on yourself you're putting on yourself a perception that you believe other people have about you.
Yes.
And so instead of allowing that to be shaped by who you are in Christ, you're deciding that it's shaped by what other people say.
Yeah, and I think maybe different said for me is none of that actually has to do with what I think about who I am in Christ.
Right.
That's different. That's me standing on my own 2 feet.
Yeah.
I think what is different is I've let a cultural perspective of how you're supposed to interact with people graciously shape how I view grace.
Yeah.
So it doesn't change anything about who I think I am in Christ.
Which is super funny though, because
I think it is because I care about people.
Yeah.
When you said that, that's what triggered in my mind. I think it's actually because I have said I don't care about people because I'm using the standard of what it looks like culturally to care for people.
You protest too much.
But I think that's the tension is
He's
that
an old softy.
What's the tension is that I actually do care about people, and I think that's probably why I've believed that is because I'm trying to guard them.
Yeah. Well, here's just an example of how you care about people. If I'm inviting somebody over to my house, I'm like, hey, come over from 6 to 9. If you're inviting somebody over to your house, you're like, hey, just come over.
Yeah.
I just want you to be here. And I'm like, look,
it's a personality thing. Yeah.
It is part of the personality. But my point being that like,
I'm not ignoring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes total sense. Wow. I didn't realize this was going to be like a episode where I'm like
You're welcome.
I don't know, whatever. Introspection. But no,
we got off the topic, but I think this was beautiful.
Oh, it was really
I
good.
loved it.
Well, I think it's not too far off the topic because I think a lot of people feel like of the three of us, probably people feel more tension with me than you guys do. So maybe this is helpful. Everybody else is like, oh, thank God we worked through that one.
Oh man,
I can't wait to see the new Micah.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to change how I interact with people. I think it's going to change my mindset. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it will.
Absolutely.
I think it'll change how you interact with people a little bit because I don't think that a change in mindset can't impact how you interact.
That's fair.
Now, it might be minute, but you and I and Pierce have always said it really does boil down to what's in the heart. Mm-hmm. And I think a correct perspective actually shapes the action.
Agreed. Yeah, no. Yeah. So we'll see. Let's just wait and see.
Because I think what will probably happen is there will be a point, some point in your future, maybe just once, where you go, oh man, I'm venturing into butthole instead of grace, or no, I'm being firm because grace. Like this is, and even that little thought going through your head will shape what happens next. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes you'll need to be heavier handed to be gracious.
Yeah.
And you won't hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
You won't need to pull back and go, wait a minute, I'm not being gracious.
Because I won't feel like I'm trying to guard.
Yeah. But the flip will be true as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I bet it'll make me less intense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, probably not.
No, I'm saying like the statements, you know what I mean? Like because I think if I've believed the lie, that me being firm with somebody or intense with somebody is not out of concern for them and not gracious, then it's probably the filter by which I'm having that conversation. Mm-hmm. If I have an intense conversation with somebody and realize as the conversation is going that it's because I care about this person, that becomes the forefront of what I'm thinking.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
Shaped
so like
by the care.
It might not feel less intense to that person, but I think for me, what it'll do is it'll change. I will probably, because usually when I get intense, people get defensive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when they get defensive, they try to come at me. And then that's not a good situation because I'm going to just demolish you, right? So like that might change.
Yeah,
that part might change.
You'll remember that I'm doing this for their sake.
I think what'll change is like that moment when I start wrecking you.
You know what it is? This is, it's going to fall apart. This example is going to fall apart. But it is, when Riker was really little, he hated medicine, like hated it. And I don't know how old he was. I say really little. He might have been like 8 or 7, but he hated medicine. Couldn't swallow pills, but he hated and he was so sick. And the dude was running like 103, 104 fever, just felt terrible. And he needed medicine and he wouldn't take it And Michelle called me at the studio and she was like, he's so miserable and he's throwing up and he's got bad fever and he won't take his medicine. And I came home and had to be mean to him and force the medicine down his throat. Like, I was like, dude, I don't have a choice in this. You're not in trouble. I'm not mad at you.
Yeah.
The only way that I know how to make your body feel better
Yeah.
is
Give you
to
this
get this
medicine.
medicine down your throat.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to like it and you're going to be mad at me, but I don't have a choice. Like, I have to do this for my son,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Like, it's an antibiotic. You can't get rid of what's in your body unless you take the antibiotic.
Yeah.
You can't. And like,
I think it's a great example.
and so that was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, because my son felt so betrayed by me in that moment. And like, he just felt mad and hurt at me. And I was like, buddy, I am trying to protect you. Like, that is my aim here. I'm trying to make you whole.
Yeah.
And it looked like I was just a butthole.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what else? Again, this was about the same time. I was watching a football game one night, and Riker went to get a snack behind me. So this is 5-6 years ago. And he comes around, I don't hear him, and he comes around and he's standing in front of me, and he's not making a sound, like he's choking.
No. Yeah.
And you know, if they're making a sound, you feel a little bit better because like something's moving. He's not making a sound. And I didn't hesitate. And I jumped up and I shoved my finger down his throat, and I'm like pulling and poking and like, and I'm just like, if I'm scratching him, I'm not thinking about if my fingernails are I don't care. I'm getting whatever's in his throat out. And he started breathing, and I'm pounding on his back as hard as I can. And like, you know what I mean? Like, that's grace.
I think those are great examples.
And in the moment, it feels like violence. But I think grace to a sinner probably always feels like violence at first, because it's the death of self.
Yeah, you're completely confronting it. Yeah.
This is a not Jewish law. This is a law-based mindset we just filtered out of Micah.
Yeah, I love it.
What a fun episode. Fun may be a wrong word, but even during the midst of it, like, because
we'll have the emotional response, but then have the gospel response.
No, absolutely. Like, I had a conversation the other day. We were talking at youth. We walked through the meat sacrifice idol passage, and so we were talking about, because we're talking about freedom from the law, and now we're talking about like practically how should we live as believers. And so showing Paul's heart, my heart's the gospel. Like, I can make a rule to eat or to not eat, but that's not the point. The point is the gospel. So in some situations eat, in some situations don't eat.
Right.
My goal is to glorify God. And so I had a conversation with somebody afterward, and we were talking about how like we need to understand the importance of the conversation he's having, because of their perspective of eating that meat, this could potentially shape a misunderstanding of the gospel and bringing other gods into our worship and things like that. So like, that's the intensity of it. If somebody doesn't like that you listen to Linkin Park, okay, like you'll disagree on preference. And one of the questions that he had brought up, because he brought up like cussing specifically, and he was like flabbergasted at my response in regards to like, in some situations, like socially, that's going to cause more of a barrier than anything. So who cares? But in other situations, again, who cares? Like don't do it over here because it might cause a barrier. But also remember, this isn't like undoing what somebody thinks about Jesus necessarily. But if your goal is to shape minds according to the gospel, if your goal is to do this, and this is causing an unnecessary barrier in conversation, then don't do it. But he couldn't think about the other side either of just like, but it would basically the kind of how I want to have more of this conversation with him. But it's the way it came across at the time was like, well, why would you ever do it? It can never glorify God, as opposed to like, and so at that point now it's becoming, you don't do it because of this versus the gospel at the core. Right. And so, I'm going to talk to this person this week more about it, and I could have misread the conversation, and we were wrapping up really quickly. So if you're listening and that was us, I apologize. But I think, well, I forget exactly where I'm going with this, but because of that, it's made me think like, that's why I kept asking throughout the conversation, like, well, how far do we push into these instances where there is a disagreement? Like, and you guys hit it beautifully hit the nail on the head, is that like, my goal is to shape the gospel, or to shape people to perceive whatever that situation is in light of the gospel. And if that's a momentary conversation, if that's me backing off and saying, cool, whatever the ongoing example throughout the whole episode was drinking alcohol. Cool. I'm not going to drink today. I'll back off, and then we'll have a conversation later, whatever the relationship between you might be. The goal is still to shape with the understanding of the gospel and to show the grace in the midst of that. And sometimes, as we eventually got, sometimes that grace will look more intense than other times based off the situation. But if the foundational goal is the gospel and to shape people's understanding in regards to that, then that shapes how we approach all those conversations, because I'm not having a conversation in the moment to be like, no, you're wrong. Stop judging me this way. Like, and making it about me being right. I say in this moment, cool. What's more important? They're obviously emotionally elevated. I'm not. What's more important is for me to just not say those words. put this to, like, not go to this situation, not do this, whatever, because it's not fruitful for the sake of the gospel in this moment. We can have a conversation later where the emotions aren't so high, and later might be 10 minutes from now. It might be a week from then or whatever. Like, that's also situational. So I think it was very, very informative for me. And then the conversation I'll have later this week in regards to those things is that, like, how can a situation be glorifying to God? We can't make rules or behavior based things. What we have to do is come at the standpoint, which you said at the very beginning of the episode, Ryan, of like, here's the truth of Jesus. Here's the truth of what he's accomplished. And here's the truth of who we are because of it. And these are the foundations that I'm building upon. And
pillars, you might even say.
Pillars even. So yeah, that was very informative for me. And I'm glad that we walked through a lot with you, Micah.
You're welcome.
In regards to grace, fun. I enjoyed it. Nice. Did you guys have anything else to add? Simpler view or anything like that?
Gospel.
Yeah, I think that was kind of where we landed, was that the wisdom conversations have to come from a foundation of the gospel.
And shaping, even like we had said this, we walked through this a little bit, but as briefly compared to the entire episode, instead of saying like gospel and preference, maybe saying gospel and non-gospel, because there might even be some biblical situations or biblical conversations that don't really affect or change the truth of the gospel, the core of the gospel.
Absolutely.
Right? So yeah, cool. Excuse me. We are at the Garden Audio as always. Steven, man, he's a super cool guy. So if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, whatever platform you're on, go to the comments and say, Steven is such a cool guy. I think he needs to know that. Let's build up Steven a little bit. We love coming out here. We love being able to record and the audio as well as the video out here. It's an awesome space, and we're so thankful for Steven. If you want to go give a shout out to Steven, you can do it through our channels, and we'll share the comments with him, or you can find him and his wife's Realty Team, 87 Realty Group on Instagram. And while you're over there, follow at simplerpod. That's us. You get to see clips from the podcast, memes, all that fun type of stuff. But it's also just a great way to reach out to us. If you are curious about a topic that you want us to talk more about, or if we mentioned some stuff today that had that you wanted to dive deeper into, let's talk about it. And it might be messages back and forth between us, or it might be a full episode. So reach out to us on social media. You'll see in the show notes down below on whatever platform you're on as well. You'll see links to Simpler Bible. This week, Ryan is wrapping up recording the rest of the episodes for the rest of the year. And so it's really exciting.
That is
exciting.
And
it's super exciting to see.
10 months.
That's
10
crazy,
months we've been
right?
Recording.
That's nuts. And so what's cool is to see the people that have been at it from the beginning. It's cool to see people that are jumping on now. So join the journey through the Bible with Simpler Bible, and just experience daily biblical growth in that. You'll see links to Micah's ministries. Go at Micah Mariano through his Instagram page, or micahmariano.com to check out what he's got going on, traveling and preaching and being a part of Eagles Wings. Get plugged in, man. We love you guys, and we're so thankful that even though it seems like I'm rambling a whole bunch at the very end, I was talking with Hannah the other day, and we have been like unbelievably blessed with the opportunities that we've been given in regards to ministry at the 456, through Simpler, through you guys traveling, through the relationships that we have. And it's just so, she's like, man, you guys are busy. And I was like, oh yeah, huh? Like, but for us, it's just opportunities that we get to see the gospel, see people.
Yeah.
So we're thankful for this and you guys being a part of it. We love y'all. And as always, keep Christ as core. What could be simpler than that? Catch y'all next week.